The 38th session of the Senate in the third regular session of the 16th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Nancy Binay will lead the chamber in prayer.
Ama namin sa langit, bigyan mo po kami ng sapat na kakayahan upang ipagpatuloy naming mapagsilbihan ang bawat Pilipinong umaasa sa amin. Gabayan mo po kami sa araw-araw upang magampanan namin ang aming mga tungkulin sa aming mga mahal sa buhay at sa taong bayan. Kami po ay nagsusumamo at muling dumudulog sa inyo upang humingi ng gabay at sapat na karunungan upang mapaglaanan ng sapat na pondo ang mga proyekto ng ating pamahalaan na makakapagpaginhawa sa buhay ng bawat Pilipino. Patnubayan po ninyo kami na maging patas at maging matatag sa lahat ng pagkakataon. Pagtibayin po ninyo ang aming mga puso at isipan nang aming mapatupad ang aming sinumpaang tungkulin. Ang lahat ng ito ay aming dinadalangin sa ngalan ng inyong anak na si Jesus. Amen.
Ngayong mundo'y gulong-gulo at lahat tayo'y litong-lito. Pag-ibig sa kapwa-tao sa daigdig dapat ituro. Kung bawat puso ay marunong magmahal, kapayapaan, kasiyahan, tiyak na makakamtan.
Ngayong mundo'y gulong-gulo at lahat tayo'y litong-lito. Pag-ibig sa kapwa-tao sa daigdig dapat ituro. Kung bawat puso ay marunong magmahal, kapayapaan, kasiyahan, tiyak na makakamtan. Lahat tayo'y pantay-pantay sa biyaya ng may kapal. Lahat sana'y ampay-ampay at nagtumulong kanino man. Kung bawat tao ay marunong magmahal, anumang kulay o salita tiyak makikisa. Te amo
Thank you to the Senate choir for that rendition of the national anthem and the song entitled Isang Mundo, Isang Awit. With the permission of the chamber, the chair declares a 1-minute suspension to allow our other colleagues to come to the hall. Session suspended.
Pwede na?
Session is resumed. The Secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter, Compañero S, Cayetano Pia S, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. Yes, the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 37th session, Wednesday, November 11, 2015, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none, the reading of the journal of session number 37, Wednesday, November 11, 2015 is hereby dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, we take up some bills for third reading. May we consider on third reading House Bill 2360 on the Securities and Exchange Commission in Bacolod City, Mr. President?
Consideration of the measure on third reading is in order.
With the consent of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the journal and the record the whole text thereof.
The Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 2360, under Committee Report number 190, an act establishing a Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC office in Bacolod City and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measure as approved on second reading were distributed to the members of the Senate last November 11, 2015, complying with the 3-day rule found under the Article 7, Section 26, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution. We are thus ready to approve the measure on third reading. I ask for a roll call vote.
The Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter, Compañero S, Cayetano P.I.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Hunasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 2360 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider on third reading Senate Bill 2720 on the comprehensive nursing law, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of Senate Bill 2720 is in order.
With the consent of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the journal and record the whole text thereof.
The Secretary is directed to do so.
Senate Bill number 2720, an act providing for a comprehensive nursing law towards quality healthcare system and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measure as approved on second reading were distributed to the members of the Senate last November 12, 2015, complying with the 3-day rule of the Constitution. We are thus ready to approve the measure on third reading. I ask for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter, Compañero S, Cayetano P.I.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Hunasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. Senate Bill 2720 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
The Secretary will read the reference of business.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 1663 entitled Resolution Directing the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, Ways and Means, and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the cutting of at least 982 trees in Toledo City, Cebu, without necessary permits from relevant government agencies by Senator Lapid.
Environment and Natural Resources.
PSR 1664 directing the Senate Committee on Health and Demography and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the prevalence of human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, in the country and the status of the Philippines in meeting the objectives, the Millennium Development Goals that aim to combat HIV/AIDS, Senator Lapid.
Health and Demography.
PSR 1665, resolution congratulating and commending Anne Lorraine Maniego Collis for honoring the Philippines with the Miss Globe 2015 title on 8 October 2015 at the Rose Theatre, Brampton, in Toronto, Canada. Senator Lapid.
Rules.
PSR 1666, congratulating and commending Nancy C. Carvajal, Horacio Howie, G. Severino, and Maria Teresa Marites D. Bitog for being named the 2015 Journalist of the Year, JOY, awarded by the Metrobank Foundation, Inc. and Probe Media Foundation, Inc. by Senator Lapid.
Rules.
PSR 1667, urging the Philippine Sports Commission and the Philippine Olympic Committee, in consultation with all the sports stakeholders, to create a master plan for the country's participation in the 2019 Southeast Asian Games and in the 2020 Summer Olympics, by Senator Sani Angara.
Games, amusement, and sports.
PSR 1668, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an investigation in aid of legislation on the non-declaration of actual sales by the operators of the small town lottery STL, which allegedly defrauded the Philippine Charity Stakes Office of at least 50 billion pesos a year, by Senator Sani Angara.
Games, amusements, and sports.
Communications letters from the Office of the President of the Philippines, transmitting to the Senate 2 regional copies of the following: Republic Act Number 10686, entitled An Act Creating the Registry of Deeds for the Province of Zamboanga, Sibugay, to be situated in the municipality of Ipil, and appropriating funds therefore, which lapsed into law on 11 October 2015 pursuant to Article 6, Section 27, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution. Republic Act Number 10687, an act providing for a comprehensive and unified student financial system for tertiary education, UNIFAST, thereby rationalizing access thereto, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes. Republic Act Number 10688, an act regulating the practice of metallurgical engineering in the Philippines, repealing for this purpose Presidential Decree numbered 1536, otherwise known as the Metallurgical Engineering Law of the Philippines, and for other purposes. Republic Act Number 10689, entitled An Act Declaring August 9 as National Indigenous Peoples' Day and mandating the meaningful observance thereof. Republic Act Number 10690, an act regulating the practice of forestry in the Philippines and appropriating funds therefore, repealing for the purpose RA Number 6239, known as the Forestry Profession Law. Republic Act Number 10691, entitled An Act Defining the role of the Department of Labor and Employment, DOLE, the local government units, and accredited non-government organizations in the establishment and operation of the Public Employment Service Office, PESO, and the operation of job placement offices in educational institutions, amending for the purpose Sections 3, 5, 6, 7, and 9 of Republic Act Number 8759, otherwise known as the Public Employment Service Office Act of 1991, Republic Act Number 10692, entitled An Act Providing for the Modernization of the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration, PAGASA, providing funds therefore and other purposes, and Republic Act Number 10693, entitled An Act Strengthening Non-Government Organizations Engaged in Microfinance Operations for the Poor, which were signed by His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III.
To the archives.
Letter from the National Economic and Development Authority dated 4 November 2015, submitting to the Senate the list of foreign retailers selling high-end or luxury goods pursuant to Section 8 of RA 8762, otherwise known as the Retail Trade Liberalization Act of 2000.
Committees on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, Economic Affairs.
Letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified, authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of RA 7653 or the New Central Bank Act. Circular letters number 2015-60, 61, 62, 64, 65, and 66, dated 1, 5, 6, 22, and 28 October and 30 September 2015. Memorandum numbers 2015-35, 36, 37, and 38, dated 7, 9, 13, and 26 October 2015, and circular numbers 887 and 888, dated 7 and 9 October 2015.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, the Minority Leader wishes to make a manifestation.
Senator Juan Ponce Enrile is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, during our last session, before we went into recess for the APEC, I made a motion. It was referred to the Committee on Rules. May I know if there is already a decision of the Committee on Rules?
To the knowledge of the Senate President, Mr. Minority Leader, there is none, although I have not been able to discuss with the Committee on Rules the issue raised by the Minority Leader. And The majority leader is not in the hall. To the best of my information, he is coming later.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Soto.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. For the record, some of the members of the Committee on Rules met a few days ago. We discussed it, as a matter of fact, here on the floor. That was Senator Coco Pimentel, Senator Sani Angara, and myself. Originally, Senator Coco Pimentel was against the motion only because it might be contrary to Section 32 of the rules. But I have discussed it with him during that short meeting that we had, and he's amenable and acceptable to the motion as long as we do not vacate or we do not declare null and void the previous hearings of the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Mr. President. Perhaps we can leave it to the body later if the majority leader does not arrive. We can leave it to the body for decision. As far as I know, there is no longer any objection to the motion, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Soto. The chair would prefer if we can just wait for the day for the majority leader to arrive. Anyway, it will not make any difference if the majority leader can just be in the hall for either today or tomorrow as we are taking up the budget. So we have enough time. With the indulgence of Senator Soto, we have enough time as we are taking up the budget. So as soon as the majority leader is available, then we can ask him to state the ruling of the Rules Committee on this issue, with the indulgence of the body. Senator Angara, as acting majority leader, is recognized.
Mr. President, as we await the filing of the committee report for the budget, we move that we suspend for a few minutes.
All right. Session suspended to await the filing of the committee report of the Committee on Finance. The session is resumed. The majority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I move for the additional reference of business.
The secretary will read the additional reference of business.
Additional reference of business. Committee report. Committee report number 294 submitted by the Committee on Finance on House number 6132 introduced by Representative Ungab et al. Entitled an act appropriating funds for the operation of the Government of the Republic of the Philippines from January 1 to December 31, 2016 and for other purposes, recommending its approval with amendment. Sponsor, Senator Ligarda and the chairman of the subcommittees.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority leader.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer House Bill 6132 or the national budget from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 6132 under Committee Report 294 is transferred from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Mr. President, I move that we consider House Bill 6132.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of House Bill 6132 is in order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
The Secretary is directed to do so.
An act appropriating funds for the operation of the Government of the Republic of the Philippines from January 1 to December 31, 2016 and for other purposes.
Majority Leader.
Move that we recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Lauren Legarda, to sponsor the measure.
Senator Lauren Legarda is recognized to sponsor House Bill 6132.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I rise to sponsor the proposed national budget.
May I interrupt the speaker? Chair could not hear anything.
Can you kindly open the microphone?
The video, I'm sorry, the audio is weak.
Mic test, 1, 2, 3. Could you kindly increase the volume?
Can we have a 1-minute suspension?
Mr. President, ready to resume?
Session is resumed.
The Chairman will deliver this rostrum, Mr. President.
Senator Legarda is once more recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to sponsor the proposed national budget for 2016. Foremost, I wish to dedicate this budget to all the victims and survivors of disasters, whether caused by natural hazards, such as typhoons Yolanda and Lando, among many others, or man-made tragedies such as the Zamboanga siege and the abuse and displacement of our lumads. This budget will cover 2 administrations, that of the outgoing President, Benigno Aquino III, and the incoming President, whoever he or she may be, in May of 2016. Thus, the continuity of programs that will be funded under this proposed budget must be ensured. This budget is not budget as usual. For many years now, we have been consistently advocating for a paradigm shift in the way we do governance and how we promote development. Faced with the threats of climate change, extreme weather events are now the new normal. We cannot be victims as usual, so we cannot have a budget as usual. We need a budget that not only responds to the basic needs of our citizens, but also proactively addresses the risks that threaten the very basic needs we aim to provide our people. We need a budget that reduces and manages existing risks and prevents the creation of new risks. I believe that by now, no one will disagree with me when I say that climate change is perhaps the greatest humanitarian challenge that the world faces today. Developed nations know this. France, which is the host of this year's climate change talks, COP21, Germany, which has led the way in renewable energy, and even the United States, which is one of the top emitters of greenhouse gases. They've been initiating measures towards energy transition, cutting down fossil fuel consumption to favor clean energy sources. Our own government has committed to reduce GHG emissions by 70% by the year 2030, with the financial and technical support from other nations. Your Committee on Finance has worked to make the 2016 national budget proactively address the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events. Programs, projects, activities for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation lodged in different agencies of government amount to 87,935,807,000 pesos, or 4.11% of the total new appropriations under the General Appropriations Bill. This is still a very small percentage, an indication that we have not totally mainstreamed disaster resilience and climate adaptation in government programs. Thus, we have included special provisions that will integrate DRR and CCAM in the programs of government. It is also worth noting that the government has increased allocation for infrastructure projects such as irrigation, road and transport networks, and housing, which at 766.3 billion pesos hits the benchmark 5% of GDP. We have included special provisions in the budget to ensure the construction of safe and resilient structure. We have worked to align the budget with the new Sustainable Development Goals recently passed in September this year. We do not expect it to be able to achieve the global targets yet because these objectives must be incorporated by the agencies themselves when they work on their respective budget proposals. Thus, this early we urge all agencies of government to align their budget for 2017 with the SDGs. We must all be forward-looking and think long-term, lest we remain forever a vulnerable developing nation. We have worked to make this budget a budget that will promote inclusive growth. We have provided very specific line items that are responsive to the needs of fisher folks and coastal communities, farmers, rural folks, indigenous peoples. We introduce amendments that will support 4th, 5th, and 6th class municipalities and barangays in the country. The proposed national budget for fiscal year 2016 amounts to 3.002 trillion pesos. On November 10, 2015, the Senate received House Bill number 6132. Automatic appropriations is worth 930.7 billion pesos. New appropriations is worth 2,138,604,596,000 pesos, divided into program funds amounting to 2,71,104,596,000 pesos, and unprogrammed funds worth 67,500,000,000 pesos. The House has introduced a provision which states that the availability of maintenance and other operating expenses and capital outlay will be for 2 years. The Senate supports this amendment. Your finance chair, along with our 6 vice chairs, have diligently conducted hearings, technical briefings, meetings with the agencies of government to extensively discuss and scrutinize all budget proposals. In contrast to the House version, the Senate has proposed new appropriations worth 2,118,604,596,000 pesos, which is 20 billion pesos less in unprogrammed funds. As mandated by the Constitution, the Department of Education receives the highest budgetary priority. we have allocated 411,482,790 or 89,000 pesos for DepEd. This is more than 15% of its budget for 2015 because the implementation of the senior high school curriculum under the K-12 program begins next year. Thus, the budget includes allocation for construction of classrooms and the hiring of additional teachers. I wish to highlight, Mr. President, an important amendment we have introduced in this budget. We have deleted all provisions referring to the budget priorities framework that authorizes department heads to reallocate funding because only Congress has the power to approve fund allocations for government programs. In line with your Finance Chair's vision of transforming the 2016 national budget into a climate and disaster resilient, risk-sensitive, gender-responsive, socially inclusive, and sustainable budget, we have proposed budget amendments and introduced changes to the general and special provisions of the GAB. We wanted to be as specific as possible to show that every agency is capable of using its resources towards building sustainable, resilient, and inclusive communities. Support for farmers, fisher folks, rural livelihoods, small entrepreneurs are evident in many of our proposed allocation. The amount of 100 million pesos is allocated for the implementation of the Barangay Kabuhayan Law under the TESDA. Livelihood and skills training centers will be established in 4th, 5th, and 6th class municipalities for employment generation. We included a special provision under TESDA's budget to include traditional skills in their non-formal technical vocational education and training. We've allocated 100 million pesos each for the Department of Trade's DTI One Town, One Product shared services facilities and 10 million pesos for regional trade fairs and exhibitions, programs that support MSMEs. Senator Bam Aquino also included an allocation for the establishment of negosyo centers to promote ease of doing business and facilitate access to services by MSMEs, as well as funding for trade and investment promotion services of DTI. Senator Cynthia Villar boosts government support for the agriculture and fisheries sectors through funding for programs of the Department of Agriculture, such as the provision of agricultural equipment facilities and extension support education and training services, supply services, establishment of technology demonstration, which will provide equipment and training support for our farmers and fisher folks. Senator Sani Angara has introduced funding for the newly amended Public Employment Service Office, PESO Act, and for Rural and Emergency Employment Services Program of the Department of Labor and Employment. Moreover, 3.4 billion pesos is appropriated for the Development Bank of the Philippines as equity contribution of the national government and shall be used exclusively for the extension of loans to qualified MSMEs, while 6.5 billion pesos is appropriated for Land Bank of the Philippines as equity contribution of the national government and shall be used exclusively for the extension of loans to qualified farmers and fisher folks. In strengthening the government's capacity to provide social services to our citizens, we have the following proposed allocations. Allocation for the conditional cash transfer for 2016 is 62.67 billion pesos that will support 4.40 million households under the regular CCT and 377,000 households under the modified CCT. We've also introduced a special provision under the CCT. If we are to end the cycle of poverty and disasters which sets us back, we must equip our citizens, especially the poor, with the know-how, the capacity to be resilient and to be prepared. Thus, in the conduct of family development sessions among CCT beneficiaries, the DSWD shall integrate in the program the protection of the environment, disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation and mitigation, including the preservation of indigenous culture when applicable. The DSWD shall also conduct capacity building programs to prepare its beneficiaries for the onset of natural hazards. Moreover, in the implementation of the Sustainable Livelihood Program, the DSWD shall converge with the NCCA for the CCT beneficiaries to be taught skills training under the SLTs when applicable. We have also allocated funds for the completion of assistance to victims of past natural calamities and crises. This fund under the DSWD is worth 1,633,130,000 pesos for Typhoon Yolanda victims and 58,879,000 pesos for families affected by the Zamboanga siege. For our elderly population, Senator Ralph Recto has proposed an increase of 2,887,733,000 pesos in allocation for social pension of indigent senior citizens under the DSWD budget. Moreover, the 2016 budget for PhilHealth premium subsidies is worth 43.8 billion pesos, which will cover 15.4 million families and 2.8 million poor senior citizens. Meanwhile, we support the House allocation of 4.773 billion pesos for the payment of the total administrative disability TAD pension for surviving spouses of deceased World War II veterans and partial payment for TAD pension for living post-war veterans who are at least 80 years of age as of 2016. Mr. President, this is long overdue. It has never been done. Our war veterans have served their country well by putting their lives on the line. It is a shame for a nation not to honor its valiant soldiers with adequate and timely compensation. Further, we must strengthen our support for our defense forces, especially with continuing threats to our territorial integrity, such as a dispute over the West Philippine Sea. The continuing modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines should be sufficiently supported, funded without delay. For 2016, funding for the revised AFP modernization program amounts to 25 billion pesos. In terms of law enforcement and public safety, we have to ensure the swift dispensation and resolution of cases filed in our courts. The government has increased the budget for the judiciary over the years. The 2016 proposed budget for the judiciary is 26.68 billion pesos, 27% higher than its 2015 budget. A budget for 12.9 billion pesos was earmarked for the Department of Justice, 3.25 billion pesos of which is for law enforcement, as the agency aims to increase the rate of prosecutions to at least 75%, while 236.4 million pesos is for the Witness Protection Program to accommodate the additional state witnesses. Among other noteworthy appropriations are the funding for the rehabilitation and construction of dormitories of our state university, the University of the Philippines System. Senator T.G. Gingona also included funding for the modernization of the Philippine Normal University, the PNU, and for continuous training programs for teachers so we can create a pool of qualified and world-class educators. Your committee, Mr. President, is strongly considering to add capital outlay of 5 million pesos each for each state university and college during the period of amendments. This is in support of other SUCs in their research programs and in building needed infrastructure. Senator Serge Osmeña increased the budget for consultancy services for the Energy Regulatory Commission to cover expected expansion of monitoring operations of the ERC's Market Operations Service and assistance in the review and revision of the relevant rules for distribution and transmissions wheeling rates, setting, and the rules for power supply agreements. In line with our duty and commitment to ensure that our cultural integrity remains intact, we have allocated funds under the National Commission on Culture and Arts for 3 major programs: the preservation and promotion of tangible and intangible Filipino heritage through research, documentation, publication, promotion, exhibition, and film production; scholarships and grants such as funding for schools of living traditions; and third, cultural and heritage mapping projects. We've introduced a special provision that prohibits the alteration, renovation, or demolition of government buildings and open spaces declared by government cultural agencies or presumed to be important cultural properties without prior approval of the government cultural agencies and proper consultation with stakeholders and cultural groups, to be administered by the NCCA, including the protection of the sightline with regard to built heritage, cultural properties, and cultural landscapes. In undertaking major infrastructure projects, the concerned department or agency shall be responsible specifically in the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of national roads and bridges as they impact on heritage structures or aspects of heritage conservation pursuant to RA 10066 or the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009. We also aim to strengthen the cultural diplomacy programs of the Department of Foreign Affairs. We are happy to announce that we have successfully returned to the 2015 Venice Art Biennale after 51 years of absence. Our Philippine Pavilion did not disappoint even international critics and was featured in various local and international art reviews. It has opened doors of vast opportunity for our Filipino artists. We have appropriated funds in the DFA for the country's participation in the Biennale of 2017 and for the Venice Architecture Biennale of 2016, which is historic because it will be the first time that the Philippines will participate there. Finally, Mr. President, the bulk of amendments and new provisions we introduced for the 2016 national budget is aimed towards our goal of ensuring the resilience of our communities to natural hazards and climate change. The amount of 100 million pesos is provided under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources to support the Solid Waste Commission, a long-ignored agency, in its capacity building programs for local governments for the implementation of the ESWM law. The protection of our marine ecosystems should likewise be a priority of government. The Philippines has 240 million hectares of marine area based on the 200-mile exclusive economic zone. In contrast, the country's land area is only 30 million hectares. We are a maritime nation, but we do not act like one, as only 5% of our coral reefs are in good condition. We've urged the DNR to immediately address the worsening state of the country's marine ecosystems by creating a major program for coral restoration. Thus, we have allocated 500 million pesos for the National Coral Restoration Program nationwide. Under the Climate Change Commission, we have allocated 50 million pesos for the creation of the Center for Climate Resilience in Clark Green City, which is actually a counterpart of the technical grant from the German government. We're also funding capacity building programs of the CCC for local disaster risk reduction and management offices, as well as the clean energy promotion programs of the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Board and the Renewable Energy Management Bureau, or REMB. Among the amendments and new provisions we introduced are as follows. Critical public infrastructure must be designed and built to be resilient to earthquake, typhoon, flood, and other extreme weather events. In retrofitting bridges and other public infrastructure, the government shall give priority to areas considered to be highly vulnerable to seismic activity. All agencies and corporations that have supervision over the major dams shall ensure the dams under their respective jurisdiction are properly maintained, managed, and operated with updated and promulgated protocols that take into account climate change and extreme weather events and ensure coordination with PAG-ASA and other agencies of government on precipitation forecast and with efficient and functional water level monitoring system. The Department of Agrarian Reform must provide support to all agrarian reform communities for them to be attuned to CCA and DRR. The DA should increase the resilience of agricultural communities through the implementation of disaster-resilient agricultural infra projects, the distribution of development of seeds that are optimally adaptive to present and to future climate conditions, and conduct seminars and trainings for LGUs in this respect. DRR and CCA programs must be in line with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. The Philippines' intended nationally determined contribution submitted in relation to the UNFCCC, to the 21st Conference of Parties, and the Sustainable Development Goals pursuant to the Climate Change Act of 2009 as amended by the People's Survival Fund Act of 2012 and the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction Act of 2010. All government agencies and offices and LGUs must earmark a portion of their budget to ensure that protection of biological diversity is integrated and mainstreamed into their development projects and programs. All national programs, agencies, LGUs, government-owned and controlled corporations are urged to embark on energy efficiency measures and adopt the use of energy-efficient lighting in their office buildings and other public buildings and spaces. The DNR, in the selection of planting sites for the National Greening Program, shall give priority to communities ravaged by extreme weather events, and the planting materials shall be responsive to the needs of the communities. In building education facilities and acquiring new school sites, the DepEd must have design plans that are environment-friendly and consider the geohazards in the location of these facilities. All public schools must install rainwater collection systems and a material recovery facility in a suitable open space within the school premises. Public schools with available lands must establish vegetable gardens. The DepEd must also endeavor to preserve and restore the existing Gabaldon school buildings and other heritage school buildings as part of the preservation of the country's cultural heritage. No Gabaldon school building and other heritage schools will be demolished. SUCs, in coordination with the LGUs, shall include in its research program the mapping and inventory of biodiversity in the province where the main campus of the SUC is located. SUCs must also coordinate with the DNR in implementing the NGP, primarily through the establishment of clonal nurseries, the conduct of forest research, and mangrove reforestation activities. DepEd and SUCs must integrate the following in the respective curricula: environmental protection and awareness, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation and mitigation, indigenous knowledge systems pertaining to agriculture, environment, and cultural heritage. The Department of Interior and local government, meanwhile, should embark on a massive information campaign for LGUs on the said issues. The DILG should assist LGUs in the development of the comprehensive land use plan and in enacting the appropriate zoning ordinances. It must also ensure that all LGUs have a local disaster risk reduction and management office pursuant to the DRR Act, and a council whose purpose is the promotion of culture and arts in all provinces, cities, municipalities, pursuant to the local government code. We discovered that this was an unimplemented provision of the local government code. LGUs, in coordination with the National Housing Authority, shall implement the relocation and resettlement of persons living in danger areas. Resettlement sites must have basic services and facilities and access to employment and livelihood opportunities sufficient to meet the basic needs of the affected families. The barangay, municipal, or city governments shall prevent the construction of any kind of illegal dwelling unit within the respective localities. The Department of Public Works and Highways, in controlling soil erosion and slope stabilization in the construction of roads, shall give priority to the use of coconut bioengineering solution in areas where there is available supply and the cost of coconut bioengineering solution is equal to or cheaper than the conventional slope protection materials. The DPWH shall include in the design and program cost of road construction projects the planting of trees on both sides of the roads where applicable. It shall also prescribe the design of rainwater catchments to be installed in public areas where applicable. It is the responsibility of a DILG and the DPWH to ensure that evacuation centers are built on safe sites and designed to withstand wind speed of 300 kilometers per hour and moderate seismic activity of at least 8.0 magnitude on the Richter scale, to utilize natural ventilation and rainwater through the inclusion of a rainwater catchment system, and to include facilities for the special needs of women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities, and such other physical provisions guaranteeing a humane condition for evacuees. The evacuation centers shall be turned over to the LGU concerned, which shall be responsible for the maintenance and operation of the center. The budget includes funding for 4 permanent evacuation centers or buildings per region in the country. It could be increased. For the Department of Tourism, it shall prioritize areas for ecotourism, protected and biodiversity conservation areas, heritage tourism sites, and agro-tourism areas in its tourism promotion activities. For the Quick Response Fund, or QRF, the original allocation of 1 billion pesos for the Department of Transport and Communications, Office of the Secretary, was reduced to 125 million pesos. We take note that in 2015, the DOTC did not utilize its 1 billion pesos QRF. The remaining 875 million was distributed to the following agencies considered frontliners in disaster response. Additional 100 million pesos for the QRF of the Department of Agriculture, Office of the Secretary. Additional 250 million pesos for the Department of Health, Office of the Secretary. Allocation of 250 million pesos for the Department of National Defense, Office of the Secretary. Allocation of 100 million pesos for the Bureau of Fire Protection. Allocation of 100 million pesos for Philippine National Police. Allocation of 75 million pesos for the Philippine Coast Guard. I hope and I pray and I urge that the QRF remaining for the next 6 weeks of the year will be used judiciously and proactively. Mr. President, we cannot allow funds lying in government coffers while survivors of disasters wait too long for government support. That is why it is called a Quick Response Fund. Otherwise, the purpose of Congress for creating such allocation is obviously defeated. In closing, Mr. President, I am humbly honored to have been given this opportunity by your good self and my esteemed colleagues to chair the Finance Committee. I share this humble task with Filipinos who think that government has long forgotten or neglected them. Our climate refugees, our lumads or indigenous peoples, our farmers and fisher folks, our rural dwellers, the elderly, our micro and small entrepreneurs, our informal settlers, our suffering commuters, all of whom are greatly vulnerable to disasters and climate change. But if we address this vulnerability, if we reduce the risks in their communities, if we support their micro and small livelihoods, if we promote their skills and their traditions which they have, if we engage them in capacity building programs and provide them micro capital, they will become more productive citizens and less dependent on government. We have just successfully hosted the 2015 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, or APEC. President Aquino has concluded his visit to Kuala Lumpur for the 27th ASEAN Summit. But what actually do APEC, the ASEAN Summit, and the emerging ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, mean to the ordinary Filipino? Not much. The national budget is our tool to translate these international economic and trade agreements to measurable gains. It is time that we empower those who are traditionally left out and left behind in every administration, or so sometimes we feel. It is time that we channel our resources to programs that will ensure sustainability so that we leave our children a healthy and livable country that they deserve. Yes, development is good, but development without conscience destroys our communities. It cannot be development at all cost. We want to leave a legacy budget that is socially inclusive, that is gender responsive, that is climate adaptive, that is attuned towards reducing disaster risks, and mainstreams culture, heritage in every department, something that is also sensitive and responsive to the needs of the vulnerable sectors of our population. And I earnestly hope, Mr. President, that this proposed budget for fiscal year 2016 will merit the approval of our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ligarda.
Mr. President, the Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Ralph Recto, who is the Vice Chair of the Finance Committee, will also deliver a co-sponsorship speech.
The Vice Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Ralph Recto, is recognized to deliver a co-sponsorship speech.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, budget comes from the old French word, budget, which means bag or purse. In the olden days, a person's entire wealth could fit in a budget, and so did the entire budget of a government office. During the birth of our republic, General Luna was said to have lugged through battles a satchel containing all the monies his fledgling army had. Today, it takes a battalion of men just to pour over payroll sheets of the armed forces. But whatever the era, whoever was in power, making the nation's purse provide for the nation's needs has been once constant in our history. Through the years, getting money out of the purse has not been the main challenge. Putting money into it is. This budget is no different. The finished product, the GAA, is a thick catalog of projects. What will appear there are the dizzying columns of expenditures, but none of the revenues that will fund them, not even as a footnote nor as a footprint. Perhaps we should begin viewing the budget from the prism of taxes, so we may be able to appreciate the sacrifices made by taxpayers and embrace the need to properly spend them. For example, this budget will be funded by $395 billion in domestic consumption tax. Individual income taxpayers will contribute $439.3 billion. Companies and enterprises will add $736.6 billion. On excise tax alone, smokers will cough up $94.4 billion. Drinkers, more so the alcohol-proof ones, $64 billion. And those who gas up, whether riding in tandem or in style, $12.9 billion. If you will be buying a shoebox condo next year, you will be among those who will raise a $10 billion property tax collection goal and the $105 billion target for documentary stamp taxes. In short, it is the people who will pay for this budget, not government, not Congress, not Malacanang. It is their tax payment which provide the scaffolding for schools to rise and for the economy to grow. Government's role is just to collect them, but that unto itself is a hard job, but less on the collector than on the payer. Next year, taxpayers will remit $2.025 trillion to the BIR, while customs will try to collect $498.7 billion, which it can only do by thinking outside the balikbayan box. In the division of labor in appropriating money through, while it is the budget people who get the credit, it is the BIR and the BOC that must raise the cash. Every government since Aguinaldo's also has to contend with the people filching the purse's contents. Locks have been as easily picked as they have been installed. Even if the budget has been designed to be a see-through budget, transparency has yet to fully deter those who pilfer from it. While it is good to install checks in our expenditure system, it should not be so numerous that they choke spending, or in a scale that transparency costs would be higher than the irregularities they seek to prevent, which is akin to placing a 1 million peso lock on a drawer that contains 1,000 pesos. If private groups are complaining about too many rules and being tied down by red tape, then the relief they seek must be applied on our spending regimen as well, but in a way that will shorten and simplify the process without leaving the government shortchanged. One example is the complicated and circuitous way that a disaster-hit town can apply for calamity funds. A relaxation of rules is in order. Yes, rules must be followed in buying fire extinguishers, to use an analogy, but one must not haggle down the price of a water hose when their neighbor's house is already on fire. Another is the slow pace that our classrooms are being built and teachers are being hired. They provide a snapshot of our underspending. In 5 years, we spent 416.2 billion below program. Unobligated balances from 2011 to 2014 of 850 billion painted a more dire picture. But to its credit, the DBM, like a coxswain, has been using the bullhorn to ask agencies to implement projects fast. It is my opinion that their exhortations must be incorporated in the provisions of this budget as an institutionalized antidote to the poor absorption of funds. This we owe taxpayers, because if the budget returns to them in kind the taxes they had paid in cash, then the budget must be spent the way they had paid their taxes, promptly. We cannot hector them into paying taxes on time while putting projects that their taxes are funding on hold. There's no other way to do this, because reporting of a surplus created out of strangling infrastructure work can never be deemed a fiscal virtue. Another constant in our nation's history is the fact that the budget has been growing bigger. In fact, budget in turn comes from the Latin word bulga, from which the word bulge is derived. The budget has been bulging since. Diosdado Macabagal's last budget for 1965 was 2,009 million. 4 years later, Ferdinand Marcos's last budget of his term, the one for 1969, was 3,013 million. This means Bongbong's dad's 1969 budget was bigger than GMA's dad's 1965 budget by 44%. Ferdinand Marcos's last full-year budget was for 1985. That year, the national budget was 74.1 billion. By 1992, Corazon Aquino's last year in office, the national budget has grown to 262 billion. This means that the last budget of Pinoy Smam was 253% bigger than the last budget of Bongbong's dad. By the time Fidel Ramos bowed out in 1998, he left behind his final national budget of 537.4 billion. This means FVR's goodbye GAA was 105% bigger than the one Cory signed 6 years earlier. Joseph Estrada stayed in office less than 3 years. His last full-year budget was for 2000 worth 682.4 billion. Despite JV's dad's abbreviated term, his 2000 budget was still 27% bigger than the one FVR signed into law 2 years before. Gloria Arroyo was in power for 9 years. Her last budget for 2010 was a reenactment of the previous year's, which was 1.473 trillion. This means GMA's last budget was 115% bigger than JB's dad's last budget. For 2016, Pinoy's last Tura budget of 3,001,000,000, if approved, will be 103% bigger than GMA's last. These data point to one thing, that budgets follow a natural upward trajectory. So there's nothing historic to brag about if the newest budget is bigger than the last one the previous Malacanang's occupant left behind before he turned off the lights in his office the last time. The game changer is not in the quantity, but in the quality of spending, which recent budgets, including this one, possess. There are reasons why budgets go bulga or budgets bulge. Revenues grow, so does population, and the latter creates needs. For example, if our population grows by 2 million a year, then we must hire ideally 4,000 new policemen. This is but one of the many population-triggered expenditures. Hiring a policeman requires money, meaning taxes. And the gross salary of one cop, which under the SSL4 will go up to 371,460 annually, is equivalent to excise tax paid by 20,770 through motorbikes gassing up a full tank. Or if we produce 40 more babies every 10 minutes, then in 6 years, we have to ready a 1 million peso classroom plus a 360,000 peso a year teacher just for the 40 kids. By any means, a delayed postpartum headache for any government. Or if a town hires a nurse and decides to pay her salary out of taxes on beer, then they will have to drink 30,660 bottles to raise the amount. And those are just for one cup, one classroom of students, and one nurse alone. And yearly we need thousands of them. But through the ages, the greatest challenge of all, for which no government was except to confront, was to pull out as many programs from the bag, leading one official to once compare the art of budgeting to that famous miracle of feeding a multitude out of a few loaves of bread. The needs have always been many and the resources never enough. Stretching the budget peso requires proper allocation, which simply means spending the right amount for the right project by the right agency at the right time. If these are not enough to satiate the clamor for more funds, then many governments had resorted to the old trick of magnifying the budget's magnitude. For example, a 1 million peso allocation for a road may sport multiple labels and is accounted for many times. If it's a product of community consultation, it is booked under grassroots budgeting. If the same road leads to a tourist area, it is reckoned as a road to tourism. If it is in a conflict area, it resurrects in the roads to promote peace situation or peace section. If it traverses a rice field, technically, it can wear another hat, that of an agriculture infrastructure. If it is lodged in DILG, it can be counted as a local government initiative. Finally, it is counted as an infrastructure spending. But at the end of the day, it is still a 1 million peso road, albeit one which has undergone many apparitions. But I would like to defend this practice. It is not multiple labeling intended to inflate the budget's contents. Rather, it is a sound way of capturing a project's multi-dimensional impact. Why? Because budgeting is not only about the bottom line. The process is also important. More so if it involves people at the bottom, which until a couple of years ago was never done. Mr. President, the budget before us today is a budget of entitlements. It is a budget of increases. It is a budget of investments for the future. For fiscal conservatives, entitlement connotes something pejorative. It has been maligned as those which it is not because, first, there are conditions attached. Second, some recipients have made investments which entitle them to dividends. Third, many are merit-based. To those who don't believe in entitlements, let me ask you this. Are the poor not entitled to help? The sick not entitled to hospitalization? The students to education? The old to care? And the veterans to the gratitude of the nation? These are the entitlements defined in the Philippine setting. And our society's compassion is measured by these. In this budget, entitlements which empower a person and not emasculate his potential are too many to count. We will place 1,468,000 60-year-olds and above under the Indigent Seniors Program, or 500,000 more than the 939,609 enrolled this year. We will provide health insurance to 15.4 million poor families, or 3/4 of the population, and 2.8 million senior citizens at a cost of 43.8 billion. We will sustain support to 4.6 million families whom the 4-Piece program is helping so they can emancipate themselves from poverty. We will feed 3.3 million children in daycare centers and public schools. There will be more than 100 million meals served to them. We will set aside 61.7 billion as pension for those who have served the flag and those left behind by heroes who had given their last full measure of devotion to our country. We will fund the schooling of millions at the cost of billions. From 794 would-be PhDs in science courses to 2,407 masteral in science scholars to 16,577 undergraduates in science degrees to tens of thousands of scholars in SUCs to the 1.8 million high school students under the GATSPE program to 231,895 TechVoc trainees, even medical doctors. This is a budget of increases. The Department of Health's budget will increase from 87.8 billion this year to 124.2 billion next year, an impressive 41% booster shot never before seen in history. The allocation for the Health Facilities Enhancement Program will jump from 13.1 billion to 27 billion. The 11,240 projects it seeks to fund takes up 104 pages of small print in the budget bill. The capital outlays budget will increase from 595.8 billion this year to 766 billion next year. Because this will fund the purchase of seedlings, laptops, police cars, and military hardware, it will, however, be inaccurate to mention supremely creative, not to mention supremely creative to equate all of this with infrastructure. But even if you jettison the riders in the infra count, the remaining amount is still impressive. This budget also provides for an increase in the salary of government workers. The first-year price tag of SSL 4 is 57.9 billion. After 4 gives, the full one-year cost is 225.8 billion. But I suspect not the final one. First, does the 225.8 billion bill include pay of teachers, policemen, and other personnel to be hired over a full year installment period? Second, does it factor in government counterpart to payroll taxes such as GSIS and pag-ibig contributions, which as an employer it is bound to pay? Third, what is the net cost to the government after income taxes had recouped a big chunk of the raise? Make no mistake about it, our civil servants deserve a raise, and this government prays for proposing it. But like previous legislation which had gone through this chamber before, the SSL 4 proposal can stand improvements, such as First, is it possible to trim the proposed pay increase for those in the top tier? Second, can this be enacted together with the proposal to, at most, adjust tax rates, or at least index them to inflation? I don't believe that a public sector pay raise and an income tax cut mutually cancel each other. On the contrary, the first reinforces the need for the last. If we don't adjust taxes, then the taxpayers who will fund the raise might accuse us of bartering tax cuts for many for a pay raise of a few. The imperative for new tax rates can be illustrated by this. One GSIS contribution loan on salary grade 21, step 1, holder who will gross 693,660 per annum 5 years from now will have to fork over 62,429 a year to the state pension fund. This is on top of deductions accruing from his migration to the top tax bracket, making him a member of the elite 32% club if present tax rates remain. This is a budget that invests in the future. To train our young so they can conquer the future and compete with the rest of the world, we will be spending $61.8 billion to build 43,000 classrooms next year. We will create 62,000 new teaching posts, buy 103.2 million textbooks, and equip 4,553 new vocational laboratories. To improve our defense posture, we will spend $25 billion to modernize our armed forces. On food security, we will spend $22.2 billion to bring water to new farmlands, $12.9 billion for new farm roads, and $756 million for fish ports. On the threats from climate change, $128.6 billion by DBM's count will be spent to repair damages from past weather disturbances and to brace for future ones. But when we say investments for the future, it does not cover spending alone. It also includes budgetary provisions which do not sport peso signs. I am referring to general and special provisions in the budget which encapsulate hard-won reforms in public expenditure management, like innovations in transparency and the consultative way the budget is put together. If the budget were a painting, it could very well be in the letras y figuras style in vogue during the Spanish era. What I am saying is that the letras or the provisions in the budget are as important as the figuras therein. Mr. President, the mantra of inclusivity should apply to the crafting of budget as well. Such openness is not just a cornerstone of laws of budgeting, but a hallmark of reform. It is in this spirit that I have proposed amendments, detailed, explained, itemized, to the General Appropriations Bill as approved by the House. After all, we will be remiss in our duties if in our review of the budget we discover oversight but did not correct it, paralyzed as we are by the cynicism that it will be quashed by a veto we cannot override. To their credit, the executive branch concurred with almost all of our amendments to the past two GAAs, which validates the value of legislative inputs. I will elaborate on my amendments when it is my turn to defend the budgets of agencies under my subcommittee. But let me give you a preview of their nature. They're about expanding the coverage of the senior pension, funding the unfinished work in Yolanda areas and in Zamboanga, financing Lando reconstruction, improving facilities in our science high schools, just to cite a few. And for as long as the motto in our seal remains, legis servita pax fiat, or law serves peace, let it be done, and has not been changed to approbare legis cum non postulantes, or to approve laws without asking, I think we should uphold the Senate tradition of improving the pieces of legislation sent to it, the most important of which is the national budget. I close, Mr. President, by extending my thanks and congratulations to the men and women of the DBM who assembled this 1-foot-thick stack of budget documents which will never fit into a budget, and to the other economic managers in what I would describe as their curtain call in this chamber as far as the national budget of this administration is concerned. Because there are second and third acts in Philippine politics, some of them may be sitting where they are now, same time next year. Maraming salamat at mabuhay po kayo. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Recto, the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I share Senator Recto's sentiments regarding the need for tax reform and many of his good ideas. And definitely, the Committee on Ways and Means, should the House decide to pass, that will fast-track such a measure. Mr. President, Senator Enrile wishes to interpolate, the Minority Leader wishes to interpolate the sponsor, Senator Legarda.
On the period of interpellation, as the Minority Leader, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile, is recognized. The principal sponsor, Senator Legarda, is again recognized.
If I may ask, Mr. President, the lady sponsor to take
The Minority Leader is requesting the sponsor to take the podium beside the Majority Leader.
for her assistants to join her.
The Minority Leader is requesting that the sponsor takes the podium reserved for the Majority Leader.
Thank you for that invitation. May I kindly request that I stay here? The microphone is fixed already, and the staff are all here. I believe that the questions will be posed on the Office of the President. The Executive Secretary is here. The LBRMO is here. We would need the staff for whatever answers the good Minority Leader. So, if he doesn't mind, this kind of position would actually be ideal.
I regret to say that I do mind.
May I request the Minority Leader to address the microphone, please? The chair can hardly hear.
Mr. President, I regret to say that I do mind because age has caught up with this member of the chamber, and that's why I'm asking for the good sponsor of this bill to come to the center so that I could hear her.
Is it possible for the Minority Leader to use the rostrum to the right or left of the sponsor,
Well,
if that is in order?
I will accommodate her, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minority Leader.
Hearing the two colleagues in this chamber who sponsored this measure this morning, the distinguished chairman of the Finance Committee and the President pro tempore of the Senate, I was almost tempted to give up and say amen and render a motion to approve the entire budget without debate. However, duty requires this representation to posit some questions, maybe impertinent, maybe unnecessary, maybe unneeded, but nonetheless it must be posited and asked in order to find out whether indeed this budget is well conceived and well thought out. And so, Mr. President, with that, I would like to ask some preliminary questions before I go to the uh, offices involved in the operations of the government. And my first question, Mr. President, is this. What are the assumptions that went into the crafting of this huge budget, the biggest budget ever to be presented to this chamber ever since? And that is my first question, and I hope I will be favored with clear, concise, and direct answers.
Mr. President, first of all, I thank the Minority Leader.
Excuse me, the audio is not working. Ano ba yan, OG? Voice recorder. 1 minute suspension.
Yung general principles, yung president, on the last day. So, sasagutin ako. Because on the last day.
Check mic. Check mic.
The session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the good minority leader for that question, which was actually discussed in the DBCC when the budgets were being deliberated on. And I would like to read the Philippine macro indicators, which served as the assumptions for this year's or next year's budget, Mr. President. In terms of the real GDP growth, the proposed, based on the proposed 2016 budget, the budget assumption is a growth of 7.8%, Mr. President, with an inflation rate of 2 to 4%, 2% to 4%. So the budget assumption is a 7 to 8% GDP growth and 2 to 4% of inflation.
That is the assumption on the growth side.
Yes, Mr. President.
That is for 2016.
That is the budget framework or the macroeconomic indicators for which the 2016 proposed budget was based on, Mr. President.
All right. I will make myself clearer. What is the expected growth of the economy for 2015?
The expected growth for 2015, Mr. President, is 7 to 8%. 7 to 8%, Mr. President.
7%?
7 to 8% was the projected
Yeah, that was the estimate. But the actual, we are now closing the calendar year.
Yes, for the last quarter.
What does the economic manager say? They oversee this. What is the figure in their heads today?
Yes. The first semester's growth, Mr. President, was 5.3%. Actually, Mr. President, these are part of the general principles, and for more up-to-date, accurate, I'm asking NEDA and DBM to be here. Just to let you know, Mr. President, the DBM and NEDA were not asked to come here now for these general macroeconomic indicators because they were scheduled, as we agreed on the third day. However, I'm asking them to come so that we have more accurate figures to date. But the first semester's growth, Mr. President, real, would be 5.3%.
How about in the second quarter and third
Do we have the
quarter?
second quarter?
It's simple. Just average the 3 quarters that have been finished.
The third quarter growth.
And the last quarter is about to end.
What is the third quarter? Meron tayo? Do you have it?
The chair believes that the third quarter GDP growth will be available next week. It's not available at this point.
I don't have the figures right now, but because based on your questions, Mr. President, and contrary to what was discussed in caucus, I'm requesting NEDA and DBM and DOF to be here today. Because we were ready for the agencies, but since there are questions from our colleagues on the general principles, I'm therefore requesting DBM, NEDA, and DOF to be here today. All I have, Mr. President, now is the 5.3 of real GDP growth of the first semester, which is
What was the
5.3.
What were the growth generators for that growth in the economy? Exports, investments, consumptions.
The services sector, Mr. President, continued to drive the economy, followed by industry and agriculture. And there are key subsectors which drove these expansions: manufacturing, trade and repair of motor vehicles, personal and household goods, even real estate, Mr. President, and construction. And the pickup in domestic demand, the robustness of the BPO industry also contributed to that, and the acceleration of the tourism subsector, Mr. President, contributed to the sustained growth.
Mr. President, in my little acquired knowledge about these things, there are only 3 generators of growth in the economy. You have your economy is either led by consumption, by investment, or by export. Which of these three, or all, are involved in generating that growth in the economy? So that we will know what we are talking about here, whether this budget is really supportable or not.
Yes, Mr. President. On the demand side, Mr. President, the expansion of the Philippine economy during the first semester of this year came from the accelerated, strong domestic consumption. Household consumption accounted for most of the growth, Mr. President, followed by capital formation and government final consumption expenditure.
So, of that growth, how much was the contribution of the government in consumption?
Government consumption, Mr. President, is 2.9%, but it was private consumption that has that contributed 6.1%.
For that quarter?
Yes, I believe, Mr. President.
What percentage of the growth was that? 20%, 30%, 15%, 0%?
What the figures I have here, it must be accurate. On the demand side, the private consumption made up for 6.1%, and government consumption contributed to 2.9%, and capital formation 14.3%, exports 5%, and imports 10.6%.
Now, with that kind of a projection for the first quarter of the year, the current year, is it really realizable to attain a growth of 7 to 8% for the economy in 2016?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was talking to the staff, Mr. President. What is the question, Mr. President?
Given the fact that the first quarter pointed out by the distinguished sponsor of the measure for the current year was only over 5% instead of close to 7, much less 8%.
I don't think we could reach the target, Mr. President, if that's a quick question.
Is it justifiable or realistic to assume that the economy will grow that fast in 2016 to attain a growth projection of 7 to 8%?
I don't think so, Mr. President. Honestly, during the budget hearings in DBCC, those are the same questions I asked, and the growth target of 7 to 8% is not realistic, and I tell you candidly that it will not be attained.
And if that answer is correct, and I think it is a fairly correct and honest answer, how then can we justify a huge budget of 3 trillion for 2016? Are we going to flood the country with spending that may not be realizable or supportable?
Well, there could be two options, Mr. President. We trim the budget or we increase our deficit. And perhaps the deficit will have to be higher than what they projected the deficit to be.
But if we are going to do a deficit spending for the economy, will that be good for the people, or will that redound to their welfare, or will that sink them?
Mr. President, honestly, these were the same concerns I asked of our financial managers. And I would request that when Secretary Balisacan and Secretary Abad are here on the floor, I'm asking them to come now because they were asked to come in 3 days per our agreement. Then they could ably assist me, because your concerns, Mr. President, are the same concerns I posed to them during the hearing. I told them that first, the 7 to 8% growth is not realizable or attainable. And it's true. We're in November, and I don't think we would reach an 8% growth. And I asked the question, why are you coming up with a 3.002 trillion budget, and how would you come up with that? Through deficit spending. So I am one with you with that, and I would seek your kind indulgence so that the ones who crafted this budget, remember, Mr. President, the budget which I studied and I helped in every agency was given to us from the NEP to the GAB, and these were given to us by the executive managers who and the budget group. So I would ask for them to assist me in answering your questions, because I may have my own reasons, and it may not be shared by our finance officers of the executive.
Anyway, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute. Sorry.
To assist the
Session is resumed. Yes,
Thank you,
the
Mr.
minority
President,
leader.
to assist the Lady Chairman.
Ito man ang request. Para masagot ko kayo ng matino, we will ask
My only problem, Mr. President, is that none of the sponsors, and I beg their indulgence, have discussed this portion of the budget. They did not tell us exactly the status of the economy,
yeah. Balisakan.
where they drew the assumptions to present to us a 3 trillion budget. But nevertheless, I will proceed so that we will not be delayed. Now, we have 3 branches of government, Madam Sponsor. The executive, the judiciary, and the legislative, composed of 2 houses. I saw in the video presentation that the budget for the judiciary is a little over 26 billion pesos. I do not know the budget for the House of Representatives and the Senate. If you take those 2 budgets or 3 budgets from the 3 trillion budget presented to us this morning, how much will be left at the disposal of the executive?
How much? Can we read the question again,
What is
sir?
the question?
How much, after we remove the 2 budgets, how much is?
After you remove the budget of the judiciary,
And the,
that's one branch of the government, and the budget for the House of Representatives,
and the Senate.
and the budget for the Senate, how much is the balance?
How much is the balance?
Okay, judiciary. The question is,
That is the budget of the executive. No one else can dispose that except the executive.
okay. I'm waiting for the figures, Mr. President. You're asking if we take out the budget of the judiciary,
These are separate departments of government,
yeah, the judiciary,
judiciary and the Congress.
and Congress,
Yes.
the 2 houses. What is left? Okay. Can we have the computation, please? 3.002 minus judiciary minus
Magkano ba ang balance? Magkano ang balance? lang yun eh. More or less.
With the permission of the chamber, we suspend for 1 minute.
$2.963. I'm ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Around 3. Around. Yeah. Pursuant to the question of the minority leader, the remaining budget from the 3.002 obligation budget would be 2.962 trillion.
So
We took away, per your request, the judiciary and the House of Congress.
how much is it? 2 trillion?
2.9
2.9
62
trillion.
trillion.
Let's round it up. 2.9 trillion pesos is at the disposal of the executive department. Now, of that amount for the executive department, how much are allotted to the line departments and other operating agencies disposable by those department and operating agencies for the benefit of the Filipino people?
Those allocated for the departments of the executive would comprise 1.696 trillion pesos, Mr. President.
How much?
1.696 trillion.
1.6 trillion. That's
Yes, Mr. President.
56.5% of the budget allotted to the executive department. And there is a balance of 43.5%. Who has control and discretion and disposition of that 43.5%, which is outside the budget of the line departments?
The difference, Mr. President, would be those allocated for debt service and for the internal revenue allotment, automatic appropriations.
Yes,
For the exact figure-
we will skin it and find out how much is embedded to be free fund at the disposal of someone.
I'm not sure.
Free fund.
Free.
If you remove the automatic appropriation, pension, and
I will compute that.
gratuities,
I need to compute.
and LGU shares, there must be something that is left. And who has that budget? Because
1
that
minute
is not
suspension.
reflected in the budget of the office of the president. That is reflected somewhere else. That's why I've studied the budget of the
1
Office
minute
of the
suspension,
President.
Mr. President. I'll get the figure.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Yeah, monitor. One minute suspension, Mr. President.
Sorry. No, we are under suspension.
Suspended.
CR lang ako. Okay, nahalaman ko na.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed. There
Mr.
is a pending
President,
question.
I would like to make myself clear. I'm not here to make it hard for anybody. But I think it is my duty to show that this budget has some flaws. Now, I do not fault the distinguished Lady Chairman of the Finance Committee because she's just the legislative sponsor of this proposed budget here. She did not make this. And this is really a very hard subject to digest within so short a time allotted to any chairman of the Committee on Finance. And my purpose is, since the first item to be discussed is the budget of the Office of the President, all the time, the impression of the people is that this is the only money disposable by the Office of the President. No, this is just the housekeeping budget of Malacanang. I do not even have to ask any question because this is the budget of the Executive Secretary. But the money under the disposition and control and discretion of the President is much bigger, far, far bigger than the amount reflected in this folder. And that is the reason why I'm asking these methodical questions. Because my impression, Mr. President, and I beg the indulgence of others, I fear that this budget was crafted precisely for the election of 2016.
Okay. I'm ready to answer your question,
All right.
Mr. President, with accurate figures. Earlier, you asked your chair, what is the budget if you free it of the judiciary and the House of Congress and the Senate? And I answered you that it was 2.962. And then you asked me how much is retained with the executive, and I answered you with 1.696. We are left now with a 1.3 trillion. And then we also take out
2.9. 2.9 trillion.
2.9 is the remaining, less both houses of Congress and the judiciary. Yes.
And then 1.6 is for the department.
The departments have 1.696. The difference of that 2.9 and 1.6 is 1.305 trillion, Mr. President.
That is outside of the budget of the line departments. And
Yes, Mr.
operating
President.
agencies.
Yes.
1
Yes.
trillion, more than 1 trillion. Huh?
1.3 trillion, Mr. President.
One third of the
Of the
National
3 trillion.
Expenditure Program.
Yes,
Now,
Mr. President.
Subtract from that the pensions, gratuity.
Very good. Yes. I will do that, Mr. President. Pension and gratuity will be 109 billion to, no? 109
But some
billion.
of that are already
Yes,
reflected in,
yes.
in the budget of the line department and operating agencies to
Yes.
the RLIP. Huh?
And the personnel benefits also, we deduct that from the 96 billion from the miscellaneous personal benefits fund. We also take out the interest payments, the debt interest payments amounting to 392 billion 797. We take out customs, duties, and taxes, Mr. President, amounting to 25 billion. We take out the appropriations to local governments, the ERA, which is 485 billion. The budgetary support to government corporations in the amount of 123 billion, 153623 billion. And so we are left with 248.5 billion.
240.
To be exact, Mr. President, 248 582,130,000. So 248.5 billion.
May I just get that figure, madam?
248,
248
582,
582
130,
130
000. Tama ba to?
This is actually who has control, discretion, and disposition of this huge amount of 248 billion plus in the budget.
From
Not
the-
any of the line departments or
Mr.
any-
President, from the 248.5 I mentioned, I believe we also need to take out the miscellaneous personal benefits of 109 billion. So that would amount.
Mr. President, if I may, so that we
Please,
will
yes.
hasten the disposition of this matter, may I request the chairman and her staff to do the arithmetic, and we will resume when we come back this afternoon.
Actually, I can answer it now, Mr.
Okay.
President. We just delete from the figure I mentioned to you the miscellaneous personal benefits fund of 96,482,544.
What is the balance?
And the second, Mr. President, is a miscellaneous personal benefits fund of 109,204,055. This is the pension fund. If you take away 96 and 109 from a 248,582, the remaining will be 43 billion.
So 43 billion.
Opo. Alam ko naman ang inyong pinupuntira po.
Wala naman ako po pinupuntirya. Nagtatanong lang ako.
Alam ko, yun lang sa Kasi yun din pa mga tinanong ko. Yes.
43 billion.
Opo. So, ito
That
pong
is-
43,
What?
Meron pang subtraction.
the remaining funds would be the NDREAM fund of 39 and the contingent fund of 4 billion.
Ha?
NDREAM, yung National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Fund, lodged in DBM to be drawn by LGUs or agencies of government upon the approval of the President.
For
And the
what?
NDREAM Fund po, National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Fund for pre-disaster and post-disaster or response activities amounting
But,
to 39
But
billion.
that was never used during the Yolanda typhoon.
They claim they used it. In fact, I held a special hearing, Mr. President, 2 weeks ago in the aftermath of Lando, where I, in a way, chided the agencies which have unused funds of Lando, of their QRF. Just so that it's clear, the NDREAM Fund, Mr. President, is the product of a law we passed in 2010, where the 39 billion is in the budget department, but has to be approved by the President. Then every agency has
we
their...
understand that,
Yes.
Madam
Yes.
Chair.
Oo.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Ito po yung tinatawag na calamity fund. Maybe those in the bureaucracy would understand it better if you say, ito po yung calamity fund.
Kaya nga, tinatanong ko,
Opo.
dahil hindi naman nararamdaman ng tao yan eh. Kung ginagastos o hindi. Kagaya ng Yolanda, hanggang ngayon, umiiyak ang mga tao roon. Doon sa amin, may bagyo na naman, yung Marilyn. Wala
Parating.
kami nararamdaman na ayuda sa gobyerno tuwing may bagyo. This is at the discretion of somebody.
I will tell you, it is...
can be used
Yes.
or not used depending upon the whims of that somebody.
That
So
somebody, Mr. President, because the ultimate authority who will approve or disapprove this will be the President.
Correct.
Opo.
He is the one who will dispose this. Whether he will dispose it for that purpose or for anything, as long as there is bagyo, earthquake. I'm not saying
Opo.
that this is happening, but
Opo.
that is the nature of this
Ayon po
calamity
sa
fund.
batas,
Oh.
ito po ay pondo na nandyan po, ang tawag dati ay Calamity Fund, ngayon po ay tawag ng NDREAM Fund, hindi po nasa Office of the President nakapark, nasa DBM po yan.
Oo.
Ngunit po ay yung OCD po, sa ilalim po ng DND ang siyang sekretariat ng NDREAM. Maari pong dumulog ang mga ahensya ng gobyerno, ang mga lokal na pamahalaan at humingi. Pero hindi po ang DBM Secretary or ang SND. Kailangan po i-approve ng Pangulo. Ito po yung Calamity
Alam
Fund,
ko
ngayon
po
po
yan.
NDREAM. Pinapaliwanag ko lang po para... Opo.
Halos kalahating siglo na ako sa gobyerno.
I know, I am
Kaya
half
alam
your
ko
age
yan.
and you have more
Ngunit,
experience. I'm just explaining it so that it's on the record.
Walang pondo ang ehekutibo na hindi pwedeng pakialaman ng presidente ng Pilipinas. Maski anong, except siguro yung ombudsman at saka yung mga constitutional commission. You must remember that all the aligned departments and bureaus and offices are under the supervision and control of the President. Oh. Ngayon. So magkano ang balanse ngayon? Na tanggalin mo pa yung kailangan tanggalin doon sa 43 billion.
Wala na po.
Ah?
Yung sa pagitan po ng NDREAM na 39 at yung 4 billion po na contingent fund po sa Office of the President, then that's it, no?
Wala
Naubos na po.
Ano yung 39?
Yung po yung Calamity Fund, yung NDREAM Fund po,
39.
that the President has the authority to approve or disapprove.
Magandang pangalan and hindi ko na...
Tayo po ang nagpangalan yun sa Kongreso. That is a law under the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act of 2010 when you were Senate President. And Senator Biazon was the sponsor as chair of the Defense Committee. Opo.
Meron bang, is there any instance where the budget secretary can dispose or authorize the disposition of any fund in the budget without the approval of the President?
To departments. The regular budgets, I believe, do not need the approval of the President, no? Once Congress approves the General Appropriations Act, then the budgets are lodged in the various departments and agencies. I do not believe that every...
Automatic appropriations and other identifiable recurring budget allocations, yes. But as far as maintenance and operating expenditures and even capital outlays, are you telling me that the President has only supervision and not control?
Has all the supervision?
Only supervision and not control?
Of course, the President, with all his power, can actually look over, of course, he has to look over the work of his team, of his cabinet members. But I'm saying, Mr. President, is after the budgets have been approved and it is lodged in the various departments and agencies of government, it is the responsibility of the cabinet secretary and his team to dispense with the budget judiciously and expeditiously. However, you were asking about those which are lodged with the President. It is the NDREAM and the contingent fund which are directly lodged with him, Mr. President,
Okay.
apart from the office of the President.
Mr. President, can we continue this afternoon so that we will have the executives who will assist the lady to answer my question on those preliminary ones?
Yes. Okay. The Minority Leader has requested that at this stage we suspend the deliberations on the 2016 budget. If there are no objection, the chair hereby declares the session suspended until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, thank you. So, General Principal.